Hi, I'm John Stein and Executive Director of the Open Voice Network. We make voice worthy of user trust, and this is the Future of Voice podcast. We're delighted to welcome today to the podcast Anil Lewis. Anil is Executive Director for Blindness Initiatives for the National Federation of the Blind, their offices, and he's located in Baltimore, Maryland. He coordinates outreach, marketing, fundraising activities for a national nonprofit organization. No doubt you've all heard, leading a dynamic team of individuals. And they're responsible for the creation, development, implementation, and replication of innovative projects and programs through a nationwide network of affiliates. They work to positively affect the education, employment, and quality of life of all blind people. And Neil, thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking time. Glad to have you.
Oh, John, my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Let's start with your origin story. And those who have had the privilege of, reading a bit of your biography, it's not perhaps what one expected. And you grew up in a family that was affected by retinitis pigmentosa, but that didn't come to you until later in life.
Yeah.
Tell us about your history and your family and all of a sudden those moments in Atlanta, Georgia State, please.
Well, I'll give you the Reader's Digest version because I don't want to bore your viewers and listeners. But yes, I did grow up in a family of four children. My father passed when I was young, so my mom had to raise all four of us basically on her own. And three of us had retinitis pigmentosa, diagnosed very early on. My brother and sister, retinitis pigmentosa is a slow, progressive deterioration of the retina. At least that's the way it's supposed to happen. And that's the experience that my older brother and older sister had. Their vision diminished as they got older. I had relatively good sight, driving the whole deal up until age 25. And unfortunately, when the retinitis pigmentosa started impacting me, it happened so drastically over a weekend that I went from being able to see and drive to not being able to read the information on my computer screen. So it was pretty fast. And, there's a whole different debate around whether that's better or worse. But at the time, I was actually working on my undergraduate degree at Georgia State University, bachelor's in business administration with an emphasis in computer information systems. And that I think was really somewhat of a blessing because as I became blind and needed to acquire, new skills to do things, learning how to read Braille, learning how to travel independently with a white cane, using access technology. The access technology was key for me. So we have software that allows a blind person to actually hear the text that's on the screen. And in many instances, when it's done correctly, get information about the images on the screen. And luckily, I was able to use that technology to continue my degree pursuit in computer information systems. And I was able to graduate from Georgia State University with that bachelor's degree back in 1993.
And you've gone from there, and you now have your master's in
Public
public
administration.
public
Yeah, and it was a
administration.
good.
Forgive me. And
Mhm.
and but those access tools, I think that is. We've had some prior conversation, Neil, and just tell us about the development of those access tools. Tell us perhaps the role of the blindness initiatives in helping develop those access tools. I think it's a very important concept, very important understanding.
hmm And I think that and I'm glad you gave me the opportunity to talk about my degree pursuits because they were a very good complement with my emphasis in computer information systems. I was able to get a lot of knowledge around the technology. Again, speech technology, large print technology they were all essential for me to be able to still use computers and still are major technologies that are used by blind people today. But the master's in public administration with an emphasis in policy analysis and program evaluation helped me also to move into a space where I was able to make sure the policies that are put in place actually complement the desire and need for that technology. So luckily, I was able to find the National Federation of the Blind, and I was able to use those talents to build on what the National Federation of the Blind knows, that blindness is not the characteristic that defines you or your future, and that every day we raise expectations for blind people because we realize it's those low expectations that create obstacles between blind people and our dreams. You can live the life you want, and blindness is not what holds you back. And blindness won't hold you back, but lack of access to information will. So the voice technologies have become essential. Most blind individuals who are able to interact in a competitive work environment because many of them are so technologically dependent or equally dependent on the voice technologies. Just as an aside, I really love the fact that we're having this discussion around the open voice network, because one of the other things that the National Federation of the Blind helped me establish was my voice, because people with disabilities sometimes are fortunately robbed of their voice to speak on behalf of themselves, and also to in diminishing that voice, our participation, our expertise, our talent goes unnoticed. But in the voice space, there's some intersections here that I think are essential to our participation. Because we are so dependent on voice output to information, and other people with disabilities are dependent on voice input and recall to information, having us participate in the development and testing of that software, I think, is essential.
Let's talk about those intersections. And you mentioned several things here of just being the value of voice, giving in voice to individuals, enabling individuals to hear. Where are those intersections for voice? If you had the top 4 to 5 uses of voice technology, conversational AI technology for your constituents, what would those be?
Mm-hmm. The missing factor is interesting how both have been developed in kind of parallel streams without intersecting. I've gone to some corporate voice conferences, and they talk about using AI and voice integration, et cetera. But with the extreme absence of the utility of it for people with disabilities, and then we as people with disabilities are developing technologies without really looking at the overall impact to industry. In the beginning, there was technology that people could use to speak to the computer, and it would transcribe their voice. It was done for
Mhm.
people with disabilities. And unfortunately, as a result, it was extremely expensive. And then, of course, as a blind person, there was speech output technology I was using to access the computers. And again, since it was designed specifically for blind people, it was extremely expensive as well, because there were no economies of scale, no market really participation in that. While simultaneously within the industry, you had products being developed without the concern of people with disabilities. I think the convergence really was around like the Amazon devices. That was really kind of the real profound convergence. So if you talk to Alexa, she talks back, the whole deal. And I remember a friend of mine, who's the director of the American Association of People with Disabilities, Maria Towns, was saying at one of our conferences that if the Amazon device was developed, say back in the 1980s, it would have been considered specifically a disability interface. But now, since the industry has converged and there is that intersection, we recognize the benefits. So you'll see Microsoft building in voice transcription that people who are paralyzed used to use to interact with the computer can now use as part of the integrated software, not an additional package that's more expensive. You see uh, ability for like the Adobe interface to give you the opportunity to have the document read to you. So that's really what my speech does to the computer, but now it's integrated into mainstream technology. So with that, I think we reach economies of scale. Now that we're all on the same page and we're moving toward the development of universally accessible and inclusive technology, it's going to be a win-win for everybody.
Well, that win-win, and that's something you've emphasized in several of our conversations of as product developers, product designers,
Mm-hmm.
may be asked, well, consider, inclusive issues of and for individuals of blindness or individuals of disability. And they might
Mm-hmm.
say, well, that's a small market. It doesn't really help me. And
Right.
yet your point is that that which is very valuable for a constituency of blind individuals is going to be has proven to be extremely valuable for everyone.
Everybody.
And
Absolutely.
the ROI on that, it's just not a small market. It's all of
Mm-hmm.
us can use this. It so happens to be a great benefit to us, to
Yeah.
certain constituencies, but of great benefit to all. Speak to
And
that
we
if you
have to
would,
own
Anil.
that. As a community of people with disabilities, we have to own that, because our advocacy has been providing us access to information. And we have fallen short of making sure that the industry and corporations understand the return on investment when we're talking about what we want to achieve. Um, I think it's important to understand, even in the context of the open voice network, right? You're working on standards and the ethical implementation of standards. And a lot of people interpret standards being restrictive and that stifle innovation. And I think that that's the wrong perspective. I think that standards provides a framework, right? It offers scaffolding so that as individuals are being creative and innovative, they can develop in a means that complements the existing And if they do come up with something that's disruptive, but that's proven to be better overall, then it creates a whole shift of development for everybody to continue to move in that more positive direction. So when we're talking about people with disabilities in this space, we come to this particular question or challenge with a whole different lived experience. You know, when we leave our house every day, we're working in a world that is not designed for blind people. But even with that, we come up with innovative ways of meeting those expectations that society has for us as individuals and end up with some really interesting strategies that, again, through that convergence and that intersectionality, helps enhance the development of what would be considered more mainstream technology. So I think that as companies start recognizing that people with disabilities have a untapped talent with respect to, you know, our innovative perspective, our strategic way of problem solving, then we can benefit from the talents of all people with disabilities to create that inclusive, multi-level, multimodal intervention that helps everybody.
You make a great point, and there's a friend of mine from London who speaks of affordance. That is, we all see the world, we all perceive the world in different ways.
Mhm.
And individuals, according to our abilities, we perceive the world in different ways. You do a lot of work with children. You're a teacher, you're a mentor for blind children, and you know, we know from your work you want to establish very high standards, as you've said here in the podcast already, very high standards for the students, but also for the training and tools that they need
Mhm.
to use and acquire. What are your students looking for? And if we think about that with voice, what's kind of the next generation for them? Where can this go?
Sure. I've already touched on the fact that, you know, we come at it from a different lived experience. I think most of the students, and I love working with the students, that's the motivating factor for me. Most of the students that we work with really just want an equal opportunity to demonstrate that they can be truly amazing. You know, as a person with a disability, people see me every day just walking around and they think, oh, you're amazing. No, I'm just doing the same things everyone's expected to do. I get dressed in the morning and I go to work. But because of that, the true achievements that people make that really are amazing are diminished, right? Well, two things. One, they think that blind people can't because amazing is just getting dressed. So for a blind
Yeah.
person to be the person that creates that next innovative software, that they don't even think that's possible. So our students want the opportunity to prove that it is possible and that they can be the ones to do it. And we'll be successful when we get to the point where those students are actually integrated within the framework of the research institutions, the universities, the corporations that are responsible for making that next level, life-changing, innovative technology that's emerging. The other piece
Well,
I think that's important is when, you know, with the Open Voice Network, not only working around standards, you're talking about the ethical implementation of those standards. I think that it's important for those students and us, you know, as adults as well, to be involved in that process, just to make sure that that unintended bias that's introduced during that development process doesn't get to be so pervasive that it ends up being a struggle or a problem. So, like the bias of voice technology may not actually understand someone who may have cerebral palsy and may not have a proper speech cadence, or the information being provided in language that's easily understandable by someone with a cognitive disability. So when you include those individuals in that development process, then it becomes a better product overall. And I think that's what our students are looking for. Just a true and fair opportunity to learn and grow and be productive in these environments
you made a great point, and I'm going to just repeat it. When those capabilities, when those functionalities are included, it's a better product overall.
for everyone.
And more individuals, an individual, say with cerebral palsy or other physical disabilities, you work a lot with students in STEM, in science and technology,
Absolutely.
engineering, and that poses some additional challenges. You mentioned it just a moment ago. You know, people might say, "Oh, it's a child who's blind. He certainly can't do that," and yet you're developing and working with students in STEM, in a
Mhm.
critical area for economic development, and certainly a
Absolutely.
tremendous opportunity for those students. Tell us about kind of the biases that you come across in that realm and some of the things that your students confront.
I'm so glad you asked that question because we take a great deal of pride. The National Federation of the Blind takes a great deal of pride in the work that we've done for creating STEM opportunities, science, technology, engineering, mathematics opportunities for our blind students. President Mark Riccobono, who's the former executive director of Blindness Initiatives, he noticed this way back in the day. And he said that the school systems were not doing it for our students. In those biology courses, when you had one student that was recording the notes, one student that was doing the dissection, inevitably the blind student was going to be taking notes, never got the opportunity to put their hands on. But he actually helped develop and implement one of our first science programs. But the subsequent one that I really like is our Youth Slam, where we brought 200 blind kids in from across the country and partnered with universities in the state of Maryland. And we had those blind children dissecting sharks and doing nanoscience and building robots and building bridges and building and launching rockets. And we shifted their whole paradigm of thought around what was possible for them because the educational school system was telling them that it couldn't be done. So I love breaking through those barriers and making sure that we can make the impossible more possible. So the bias in STEM, of course, is they think that everything is visual. But what we do is we find non-visual ways of doing things. And again, when we find those non-visual ways of getting it done, we not only make it possible for blind students to actively participate, but we create multimodal means of instruction and execution that benefits everyone. There's nothing wrong with being able to see a device that tells you some temperature of something. But if you complement that with a soundscape piece, if you can see, that sound reinforces what you're perceiving. If you can't, it gives you access to information that otherwise you wouldn't be able to. It's just a win-win overall. And I love this showing people that they should be thankful for us being part of all this discussion. So when they listen to their GPS devices, most people don't read maps anymore. They listen to the turn-by-turn instructions. And I tell people, you're welcome, because we help with that. You know.
Well, I just think there's 200 additional brilliant brains being brought into the society, being brought into active innovation, being brought into creating a better future that may not have had that opportunity. We've got time for one more question.
Let me offer one
Anil,
quick nuance, though, if you don't mind.
please.
So you say, I love you say additional 200 from those 200 students that participated. Interestingly enough, there were students that came out of that experience and said, no, I'm not going to pursue STEM. But we count that as a win because those students were making that decision on an informed choice. They knew what it was like. They knew they could do it. And they said, no, I don't choose to do this. Whereas prior to that, they were making decisions not to enter STEM because the system and society told them that they couldn't.
Wonderfully said. Thank you. And thank you. One final question. We've got about 60 seconds here before we need to say thank you to you. And again, thank you for the time and this great conversation. Give us, let's say you're talking to some voice developers, and they're good-hearted people and they want to be inclusive, but you know that they may not have thought of things. What are kind of those hidden gems, those Anil advice points that we should all hear from you? What should we learn? What should we take away?
Well, the key point is I would tell them, don't miss out on the opportunity to include a blind person or a person with a disability in that research and development process. So many of you want to do the right thing and you do the product and you bring it to us and say, look what we created. And then what happens is we tell you that this was done incorrectly. And then you think that we're ungrateful. We're not ungrateful. We just want to make sure that you understand what benefits us. It's so much easier when we work collaboratively from the beginning, research and design. And then as we develop together, the end result will be a product, again, that's usable by everyone and will be the best in show, be the best product in the market.
Anil Lewis, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the conversation. And colleagues, this has been the Future of Voice podcast. And we've been with Anil Lewis, Executive Director for Blindness Initiatives at the National Federation of the Blind there in Baltimore. Anil, may you have a great day. Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
And for everyone, thanks for listening. Take care.